This video was commissioned by a very generous supporter on Patreon. God, where to start with this film? It's truly context galore due to it being the first major Hollywood release to get its distribution trampled on by the pandemic last year. When cinemas did reopen, I imagine this would have been the film most people went and saw, leaving little room for competition. I didn't feel right going to a cinema until this year to go and see The Suicide Squad. This big wait was because I distinctly remember during a screening of The Invisible Man in March 2020, the sounds of coughing in the audience made me more nervous than the movie did. Hence why I gave Tenet a skip, despite being a big fan of Christopher Nolan. This film was 20 years in the making, with the writing process beginning all the way back in 2014, and this is also his most expensive film yet. To stop spoilers from getting out, actors were locked inside a room to read the script, so I guess they just learned their lines on the day then. For those that haven't seen the film, prepare for confusion. I have a feeling that merely mentioning the word entropy is going to turn some people off. And no joke, this film's protagonist is literally called The Protagonist. It's a film that after my first watch, I was truly baffled and lost. Even after a second watch, I'm still trying to wrestle with it in my mind. It doesn't help that a lot of the dialogue is either delivered in boring, let's take a stroll down the street segments, or during very loud or intense scenes. I felt like I enriched my experience watching it a second time with subtitles on, but not so significantly that this is now my new favourite film or anything. For example, the characters exchanged a code phrase that I didn't even clock was a code until my second watch. The sound mixing on a film of this caliber should not be this bad. I'm now going to spoil the living shit out of this movie, so go and watch it and then continue with this review. For those that have come prepared, strap yourselves in and let's pick apart this film. The film surrounds a nameless CIA operative played by John David Washington. He gets recruited by an even secreter organization called Tenet. The organization is geared up to protect the present and the past against threats from humanity in the future. The protagonist witnesses futuristic technology firsthand, where the entropy of an object or person has been reversed. The biggest example this film utilizes is that of bullets. Instead of it firing from the gun, the bullets will erupt from the impact point and fly backwards into a smoking gun. This action of interacting with objects in reverse is treated like a magic power by the characters, where they can basically use the force on objects to pick them up. The inverted bullets are microcosms of the potential weapons that the future could hold that we just don't know about. It's impossible to comprehend them, even if we could see them.
There's a cold war, cold as ice. To even know its true nature is to lose.
Before we go further, I'd like to draw your attention to the origin of the word tenet. The film is inspired by the Sator Square, a Latin word square containing a 5-word palindrome. Just look at how cool this is. It's like a word search, but all the letters make words. All the words found in the palindrome relate to moments, locations, or characters in the film. Arepo, for example, is the name given to the art forger whose Goya forgery Cat authenticated. The idea of the word tenet also being a palindrome matches the structure of the film. This is most evident when midway through the film, the main character reverses his own entropy and we start seeing events from the first half echo into the second. The film begins in an opera house, opera being one of the Latin words in the square too. We see a tightly choreographed action sequence combined with Ludwig Göransson's score, which you may have heard me discuss previously in my Mandalorian videos. This was probably one of the best pieces in the movie, and I'll talk about the rest of the score a little bit later on. Anyway, Russian terrorists are interrupting a concert to get hold of a certain VIP that has connections with Tenet. Oh, and they're also after a block of material that is part of a greater whole, creating an algorithm that will end the world. Yeah, this film's pretty nuts. The security forces, including the protagonist, use gas to knock out the audience and the terrorists. For some reason, the gas just disperses the moment the protagonist and his VIP drop down into the auditorium, where his soon-to-be buddy in the future helps him out with the rescue. The terrorists take the protagonist and torture him in between two sets of train tracks. I thought this was an ingenious place for this to take place, seeing as the protagonist's screams won't be heard as the trains are going by. Strange though that the driver drivers of said trains wouldn't see them just sitting there performing this bloody interrogation. This is the moment the film confirms the protagonist as being CIA, ready to die for the cause by biting a cyanide pill. Turns out the pill is a fake though, and he wakes up on a ship being given a task of greater importance than even the CIA. He then gets taken to a bunker and has bullets with reversed entropy from the future explained to him. Having so little information about the future and its advanced technology, it was fascinating to learn later on that this war that Tenet believes is coming is a mini misdirection. The actual intent of those in the future is to undo global warming by just destroying the past entirely. What a frightening concept that so many people in the future would end up suffering from blistering heat and rising sea levels that they would rather just grandfather paradox themselves into oblivion than suffer any further. The fact this organization is called Tenet works on both an understanding of the word in the present and its Latin meaning too. The modern meaning of the word is that of a core belief or an aspect of a creed. Historically, however, its meaning is closer to a person that holds, keeps, possesses, preserves, or sustains something. It supports the idea of Tenet as an organization protecting and preserving the past from the future. The protagonist then goes to meet somebody called Neil, played by Robert Pattinson. The pair are setting up a mission to get into the flat of the inverted bullets manufacturer. Meeting Neil for the second time in the film made a rewatch of this scene rather amusing, seeing as he knew the protagonist's favourite drink despite apparently never meeting him before. It at first appears as though Neil is merely a know-it-all who works for an intelligence agency greater than the CIA. The fact Pattinson based his character's mannerisms on Christopher Hitchens also made the character's superior knowledge that much more believable. Well, except when he randomly blurted out that he was a physicist.
I have a master's in physics and we'll try and keep up.
When the pair went silently running up this building right after the build-up of music, man, that was a great little sequence. It establishes their experience in espionage by making it all look so easy. It was a shame it just led to a "you've got the wrong guy" conversation, making the whole thing feel a bit anticlimactic. Especially how they then roped down into a bustling street and nobody seemed to bat an eyelid. I had the distinct impression the characters were location hopping for the sake of it. Don't get me wrong, the trail makes sense, it just didn't deliver the information hunt with much visual flair or difficulty on the part of the main character. We then had a random scene with British intelligence man Michael Caine, whose character is hilariously called Sir Michael. Maybe I'm too accustomed to seeing him play more significant roles in Nolan's films, but I thought it was strange that he only shows up once in this for a little chat. It then led to another chat with the wife of the bullet inverter, Kat, played by Elizabeth Debicki. She describes being stuck in an abusive relationship trying to obtain custody over her son. I appreciated that her character was an art appraiser, having this analytical mind and mentally undressing the protagonist disguised as a billionaire with her eyes. It's a testament to Debicki's performance, as I really felt the pain behind her eyes. It was equally crushing seeing her meet her son outside of school, the only time she gets to see him before he's essentially kidnapped from her every weekday. I also appreciated her feeling jealous of a woman who she saw jump off the boat during a holiday when it was really her from the future travelling back in time to kill her husband. Rethinking that moment in my head though, I'm confused as to how Sator is still alive for the remainder of the film if he'd been killed in the past. Somebody in the comments is going to be able to explain this to me. I really liked the kitchen fight sequence that ended this rather depressing dinner conversation. The protagonist let these thugs think that he had the upper hand and then proceeded to bash their heads in with plates and a cheese grater of all things, acting on their overconfidence for a slick win. The forged painting that has Kat held hostage by her husband is locked away in a free port in Norway's capital city, Oslo. Fancy things get stored there, and the protagonists dress and act as fancy people to steal it. This leads to the first impressive practical marvel where a freight plane dropped gold bars out of its bottom to distract everyone whilst the pair were inside the free port. Another factor I appreciated was seeing the protagonist adopt the Wim Hof breathing technique that Neil explained away as yoga, for a segment where all the air gets sucked out of the rooms to protect the forged artwork inside. It leads to a fight sequence that we end up seeing twice in the movie. The protagonist fighting not only himself but somebody whose laws of physics are totally different from his own make both sequences fascinating to watch. It's not quite the unrumble seen in Red Dwarf's episode Backwards, but the sequence is woven into the narrative quite nicely and proves to be even-handed in more ways than one. His future self comes out of an entropy conversion chamber with the word rotor slave labelled on the side. It's another palindrome, meaning wheels or rotation, which naturally matches the mechanism that our characters spin in and out of throughout the film. The inevitability of the conflict contrasts beautifully with the fact the fight results in neither a win or a loss. He can't kill his attacker, otherwise there's no attacker to begin with, but he doesn't even know that at this point. After that amazing sequence, we see Kenneth Branagh playing the film's antagonist, Sator. It was great to see him not playing an ego-driven superstar, but an all-out antagonist that proves to be a real piece of work. This character made his fortune from mining plutonium, a radioactive substance. Funnily enough, it's the same resource the DeLorean needs to travel in time in Back to the Future. With time travel being a design of the future in this film, the material's naming may imply that Sator was the reason such technology came into reality. Supporting this idea further is the character's name's meaning being that of an originator, founder, or planter of seeds. Sator proves to be close to the devil incarnate. There are some particularly harrowing scenes where he's this close to beating Kat with a belt, not to mention two others where he really does beat the shit out of her and shoots her with an inverted bullet. The film implies this injury to be worse than being shot by a normal bullet. Aspects like this, though, seem to go right over my head. Similarly, the protagonist waking up after being blown up in reverse somehow makes him freezing cold. I'm not sure if the problem is me not being intelligent enough to understand these concepts, or if the film just does a really bad job at showing or explaining why inverted bullets and explosives are so bad compared to their regular counterparts. We now come to the scene that has possibly the worst aspects of this film all jumbled into one. I believe it to be an excuse for an exposition dump whilst showing off what a billionaire gets up to in his spare time. I get that the information the protagonist and Sator share is super secret and all, but even with subtitles, I didn't have a fucking clue what they were talking about. Kat cuts a support line, throwing Sator off the boat thing, with the protagonist turning it around and rescuing him. Despite only being off the boat a few seconds, he apparently nearly drowned. This seemed like quite a weak reason for Sator to trust him rather spontaneously in spite of the very, very big death threat he made earlier.
I'll cut your fucking throat, mate.
Things are muddled further when Sator claims to have cut the cord himself. I had to watch the clip back again in slow motion because it happened so quickly, only to find she did in fact throw him off. I'm not sure if this line was to notify the protagonist that Sator has suicidal tendencies, but we get informed about this later on anyway, and yeah, this boat scene can just jog on, quite frankly. There was a nice scene on the boat afterwards though with Kat and the protagonist. It made me realise that he obviously cares for her reunion with her son, but that his saving the world goals extend above and beyond a beautiful woman's thirst to kill her husband. Suddenly the gang were all travelling to Tallinn, I hope I'm saying that right, Estonia's capital city, which for some reason I didn't clock whatsoever on my first watch. Maybe my lack of knowledge about that specific country was to blame, but simultaneously I associated the Freeport thing with Oslo and just assumed they'd gone back there. Then again, the gang were in Italy moments earlier, once again reiterating the whole location hopping problem this film has. It's another visually impressive sequence, but it's confusing as hell. I couldn't tell Tenet members, the fire department, the police, and Sator's men apart. Who works for who? The music also took a serious turn for the worse here. I mean, what the fuck is this noise? Don't get me wrong, I appreciated the effort undergone by generating melodies that sound the same when played backwards and forwards. I end up wondering that if you listened to the score backwards, would it sound any different? Half the time though, I found the score to be either distracting or just downright horrendous. They wind up at another Freeport, which is a fairly pivotal moment, seeing as most of the film from this point will be backtracking through the first half but in reverse. I really liked this idea that the entrance into the turnstiles had to keep a close eye on themselves to ensure they both entered and left at the same time. I also appreciated that you could tell who had their entropy reversed by the gas masks. Knowing that a person's physiology changes completely by doing this raises the stakes of entering the backwards world. You'd basically be breathing in carbon dioxide and exhaling air. Once again, having subtitles on made this segment a little more understandable because I had no idea what was going on with Sator speaking backwards on my first watch. A device that can reverse speech in real time is probably from the future, like the Rotus turnstiles. It was great watching the action sequences again but in reverse. How the protagonist ended up becoming a part of the events was really interesting to watch. The reversal back into the Oslo fight is probably the most impressive thing about this film. With the knowledge that he is fighting himself, you get the distinct impression he doesn't want to do this. Despite his restraint, he has to make the impression of being a good fighter to get himself to this point in time. Saying that the protagonist is treading on eggshells during this sequence doesn't do it justice. Concluding the scene with the pair escaping from the airport just as they're going into it filled me with immense joy. Unfortunately, the remainder of the film had me more confused than at any other point. It's not even one of those you'll understand it on a second watch kind of things. This action sequence was just baffling to me. This is supposed to be Tenet's temporal pincer movement, acting with the same strategy Sator adopted by using people with normal and reversed entropy attacking a base at once. It was unclear who exactly Tenet was shooting at and why they were there in the first place. It took me a second watch to realise as well that this big battle wasn't taking place right near the boat where Sator and Kat were having their yacht party thing. Sator is after these boxes, which apparently when assembled create an algorithm for reversing the entropy of the entire planet. The filmmaker's first mistake, I think, was giving an algorithm a physical form. It just turns into a MacGuffin for acquisition, and then the film basically just becomes an international block of metal hunts. I also didn't quite understand how the characters just travelled back in time so casually between the second Oslo airport visit and the Vietnam Stalsk 12 encounter at the end. Did they all just sit around for days waiting for time to pass with their entropy reversed? Neil met the protagonist in the future, which made all the Red Label bag close-ups make sense. To think at some indeterminate point in the future he'd be putting himself in the way of a gun, it makes their parting quite emotional. And yeah, better stop that global warming, guys. So, did it suck? Honestly, I'm not sure I would recommend this film like I would with, say, The Dark Knight, Memento, Dunkirk, or Inception. Tenet is not a terrible film, but I can't decide if it's the most Nolan-y film ever or if it's just a massive parody of one. Like all those other films, the practical effects are tremendous and the hand-to-hand combat is nothing short of excellent. It has got a lot of great ideas and action sequences to make it decent. I think some of the ideas get a bit too complex though and aren't explained in sufficient or interesting ways. The inspiration for the film with the Sator Square is sufficiently embedded into the film, the performances are great, and the threat from the future makes the stakes of the film high enough to care about. Unfortunately, a lot of dull conversations, location hopping, a mixed score, and questionable moments leave this film burning a bit too close to the sun to let it fly. I give Tenet a 6 out of 10. We see a tightly choreographed action sequence combined with Ludwig, I can't say his name, blistering heat and rising water levels. It's sea levels, fool! This leads to the first impressive practical hello. You'd basically be breathing in carbon dioxide and exhaling hair. Hair?